What often gets overlooked when we talk about this being a reward for Hamas is the extent to which Hamas really doesn't want a secular two-state solution. But the Palestinian Authority, which often gets overlooked in these conversations, really does.
Now, we know that Keir Starmer is going to be announcing the UK's formal recognition of Palestine as a state. The Prime Minister has described statehood as an inalienable right of the Palestinian people. However, here's Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, commenting on Starmer's decision a little earlier on, speaking to Adam Bolton.
So I think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake because I do think it is rewarding Hamas and terrorism. It won't do anything to further getting humanitarian aid into Gaza or the release of the hostages or indeed taking those vital steps in a peace process towards a two-state solution.
Well, with me here to give a view on this landmark moment is Charlotte Leslie, Director of the Conservative Middle East Council and former Conservative MP for Bristol North West. Charlotte, we're still waiting for the Prime Minister's statement. We think it's going to come in the form of a video clip that's going to be released. We'll bring that to people as and when we get it. But what do you make of the announcement? We've just heard that Canada and Australia have done the same.
Look, I do understand the perspective of those who worry that this is, in a sense, rewarding Hamas for terror. I do understand that perspective. But having spent a bit of time in the region and knowing the region, I think there's something really important to understand, is that Hamas isn't the Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority, and Netanyahu isn't Israel and the Israelis. And what often gets overlooked when we talk about this being a reward for Hamas is the extent to which Hamas really doesn't want a secular two-state solution. But the Palestinian Authority, which often gets overlooked in these conversations, really does. And back in 2018, Netanyahu made a really big gamble. He decided to fund Hamas with the Qataris, let the Qataris fund Hamas through suitcases of cash through the Israeli territories to undermine the Palestinian Authority, who would be happy with a two-state solution and recognizing Israel, to keep Hamas alive. Now, that's the reason that many Israelis are very angry about what happened on October the 7th, because of that decision to support Hamas, an Islamist terror organization, against a secular Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. Now, having met Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, last couple of weeks ago, he is talking about the disarmament of Hamas and actually Hezbollah, wherever they may be found in Palestine, and recognition of Israel. So I think it's all about what kind of Palestinian entity do we want to deal with? The secular Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, or the Islamist terror group that Netanyahu had chosen to fund. And I think that puts a different light on who we're rewarding here.
I just want to quote you a bit from Matthew Syed's piece, which, as I mentioned at the start of this just a few minutes ago, is one of the most read pieces on today's website. It's just gone up about an hour ago. He quotes Ghazi Hamad. He's a senior operative in Hamas, and he's quoted as saying, "The initiative by several countries to recognize a Palestinian state is one of the fruits of October the 7th. We have proven that victory over Israel is not impossible, and our weapons are a symbol of a Palestinian honor." I mean, Hamas is welcoming this recognition of a Palestinian state. They're saying that this October the 7th that is actually given this gift of the recognition of a Palestinian state. How can you read it otherwise?
I mean, I wouldn't expect Hamas to say this is a disaster. Oh my goodness, what a complete, what a complete mistake October the 7th was. Of course, they're going to spin it like that. I also think that a lot now depends on what the states that recognize Palestine choose to do and how they work with the Palestinian Authority, and how we leverage this, because the recognition of a state of Palestine, as many say, will not change very much on the ground if it isn't the beginning of a political process. Actually, as David Cameron himself said at the beginning of 2024. So this isn't a new thing that the UK government's been talking about. And don't forget, it has been UK policy to recognise a two-state solution for a very long time. That said, when you've got an issue as emotive as this, with an attack as horrific as the October 7th attack was, with hostages still held, I do deeply respect people who have very understandable reservations about this.
Charlotte, why did this recognition not come attached with caveats, with obligations that The recognition will go ahead if hostages were released, or the recognition will go ahead if Hamas sat at the table and genuine negotiations towards peace were on their way. It seems that it's been given without Hamas having to do much.
Well, I think you'd probably have to ask those much closer to the negotiations what was going on. But what we've seen is just a complete impasse in trying to negotiate anything between Netanyahu, Hamas, and others. And we reached a complete stalemate. So again, traveling around in the region, the lack of recognition of a Palestinian state, and let's be honest about it, the failure of the West, who helped create the State of Israel, to actually uphold the other half of the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which was to protect the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people with that creation. That failure by us, which was recognized in 1938 as a failure, has fueled extremism, has fueled political Islam, has fueled Iran. It's the biggest recruiting sergeant for the West's enemies and the enemies of liberal democracy from militant political Islam. We weren't going anywhere. Something had to change. And that is why I think if we really set about recognizing the Palestinian Authority, dealing with secular Palestinian entities who themselves want to disarm Hamas, we may begin to get somewhere. But it's difficult because, of course, Netanyahu doesn't want a two-state solution. Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, his ultra-nationalist sanctioned ministers don't. And don't forget, for Netanyahu, if miraculously some kind of peace were to break out, that would be problematic. He'd face elections. And of course, there's that trial ongoing from 2019, which may begin, having been cancelled earlier this summer, may begin to progress again.
Charlotte, forgive me for interrupting you. We've just got the Prime Minister's statement. If you'd stay with us, let's have a listen to the Prime Minister's statement, which has just been released on X.
So today, to revive the hope of peace and a two-state solution, I state clearly, as Prime Minister of this great country, that the United Kingdom formally recognises the State of Palestine. We recognised the State of Israel more than 75 years ago as a homeland for the Jewish people. Today, we join over 150 countries who recognise a Palestinian state also. A pledge to the Palestinian and Israeli people that there can be a better future. In the face of the growing horror in the Middle East, we are acting to keep alive the possibility of peace and a two-state solution. That means a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable Palestinian state. At the moment, we have neither. Almost 2 years after the barbaric attacks of October the 7th, hostages are still held by the terrorists of Hamas. Recent images show the hostages suffering and emaciated. Hamas even refused to release all the bodies of the dead. I have met British families of the hostages. I see the torture that they endure each and every day, pain that strikes deep in people's hearts across Israel and here in the United Kingdom. The hostages must be released immediately, and we will keep fighting to bring them home. Let's be frank. Hamas is a brutal terror organisation. Our call for a genuine two-state solution is the exact opposite of their hateful vision. So we are clear, this solution is not a reward for Hamas because it means Hamas can have no future, no role in government, no role in security. Meanwhile, the man-made humanitarian crisis in Gaza reaches new depths. The Israeli government's relentless and increasing bombardment of Gaza, the offensive of recent weeks, the starvation and devastation are utterly intolerable. tens of thousands have been killed, including thousands as they tried to collect food and water. This death and destruction horrifies all of us. It must end. With the actions of Hamas, the Israeli government escalating the conflict, and settlement building being accelerated in the West Bank, the hope of a two-state solution is fading. But we cannot let that light go out. That is why we are building consensus with leaders in the region and beyond around our framework for peace. This is a practical plan to bring people together behind a common vision and a series of steps, including the reform of the Palestinian Authority, that takes us from a ceasefire in Gaza to negotiations on a two-state solution.
And that was the video statement released just moments ago by the Prime Minister, the official recognition of the Palestinian state. This follows recognitions by Canada and Australia today. Prime Minister Netanyahu has described this as absurd. Still with me is Charlotte Leslie, Director of the Conservative Middle East Council and former Conservative MP for Bristol North West. Charlotte, what did you make of what you just heard?
I thought it was interesting. You could hear Keir Starmer treading what is for him a very, very difficult line. He obviously has a lot of his party who've been pushing for Palestinian statehood for a long time, as well as those particularly post the Corbyn era, which was very troubling in terms of anti-Semitism. That idea of rewarding Hamas. I think what was clear was this is not the end of the matter. It's in a sense a beginning. And as I said before, a lot of how this turns out will depend on how the leverage of having recognised a Palestinian state is now used. It was a difficult line to walk, and I think he didn't do as badly as he might have done. I thought it was okay.
Charlotte, just going forward, what does this actually mean? Is policy going to change from the UK government, assistance given to Israel? What is it going to affect going forward?
It's going to be very interesting to see. I mean, the first thing I think it is a signal to the Netanyahu government, which I always say is different from Israel. Netanyahu is a very unpopular prime minister in Israel for a number of reasons, but it's a symbol to the Netanyahu government that the UK will not always be 100% behind them and whatever they want the UK government to do, which is in some ways as a departure from what has been the case recently. And that, I think, is an important signal to send in response to what is maybe understandable given the trauma that Israel suffered after October the 7th, but is a disproportionate and deeply concerning response in terms of international law of what's happening in Gaza. I think the second thing this does is it really distinguishes between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. And of course, there are issues with the Palestinian Authority. There's a lot of reform that needs to be done. But don't forget, you're looking at an organisation that's been systematically undermined by Israel for the last years, not least so that they are not a credible interlocutor for a two-state solution. And I think the concept of bringing the two-state solution back onto the table, however difficult that may be, in relation to settlements is very important, because we're all looking at Gaza, but what's going on in the West Bank now is quite shocking. Extremist settlers who have an idea of a greater Israel that is not based in international law, exerting their will with impunity from the government, which simply creates an ever greater security situation from disenfranchised Palestinians, who, don't forget, are also Christians, not just Muslims. There's a Christian element of the Palestinians who are suffering at Israeli settlers' hands as well, but creates a huge security issue of resentment. And we know that trauma breeds violence. And so finding some kind of way to bring a two-state solution back onto the table is a way to make, as the Prime Minister did say, both Israel and Palestine more secure.
Charlotte, thank you so much for being with us and giving us your thoughts. Charlotte Leslie there, Director of the Conservative Middle East Council and former Conservative MP for Bristol North West. Plenty of you coming in with your thoughts. Chris said, if terrorism is seen to be rewarded regardless of the intention, then it's a risk to all of our lives. Another message here from Bob, only 77 years late for the British, who left Palestine in a mess in 1948 without establishing a Palestinian state, only an Israeli state. The chaos that followed is down to the failure of the British. Too little, too late, Prime Minister. Keep your thoughts coming in. Of course, we just heard that official statement, a video statement from the Prime Minister, the UK formally recognising the state of Palestine.